these two women were coalesced, and that's how Mary Magdalene became known in the history of the church as a prostitute, although the texts don't say she was a prostitute.
It was the Gospel of Mary, a book not included in the New Testament, that revealed a fiercely independent Mary Magdalene, a woman who was an apostle and a visionary.
There's a scene in the Gospel of Mary following the ascension of Jesus in which we see the disciples, Peter, Andrew, Levi, and Mary, sitting around chatting. And at one point, Peter probes Mary as to what she has learned from Jesus. He thinks that she and Jesus have had a particularly close relationship and that Jesus may have communicated to Mary some special information that they would like to know.
And Peter is quite ready to say that Mary is the most important of the women around Jesus. So he's quite all right with that. But Mary goes on to divulge special teaching that she got from Jesus and claims to be not first among the women, but specially beloved by Jesus.
The words she speaks to the apostles reflect the unusual mystical teachings of the early Christian Gnostics.
I said to him, Lord, I saw you today in a vision. He answered and said to me, Blessed are you that you did not waver at the sight of me, for where the mind is, there is the treasure. I said to him, Lord, now does he who sees the vision see it through the soul or through the spirit? The Savior answered and said, He does not see through the soul nor through the spirit, but the mind which is between the two. That is what sees the vision.
Initially, the disciple Andrew exclaims that this teaching that she has communicated to them is very strange. How could Jesus have taught such an unusual thing? But then Peter comes along and he challenges Mary, not based on the information that she has conveyed, but based on her gender. He says something to the effect that how is it that Jesus would have communicated this information to a woman rather than to us? And it's Levi, the disciple Levi, who sort of comes to the defense of Mary of Magdala and says, oh, come on, Peter, you've always been a hothead. Who are we to judge Mary if Jesus himself found her worthy?
If you're imagining why would the Gospel of Mary not be allowed in the canon, there are multiple reasons. One would be probably that its whole attitude towards matter, towards the material universe, is too Gnostic for the tastes of the New Testament. But the other one is what it says about Mary herself. If everything she said was orthodox, if she said the most straightforward, middle-of-the-road approved doctrine, and said that she got it from Jesus, and that she was in charge, it would not get into the New Testament.
It's because that women aren't supposed to be intelligent, smart, and forthright, and they're not supposed to follow after a charismatic spiritual leader. And that makes Mary Magdalene very problematic, because if you think about it, who's the first person in the narratives that finds out Jesus is risen? It's Mary Magdalene. It's not any of the guys. It's Mary Magdalene. And so obviously she holds a very high place, but later when you get to start having all of these theologian types or the other serious guys who come in to try to figure out what's right and what's wrong, you have to sort of call her a name. And a woman who has demons or has a problem or issue, it's easier to call her a demoniac and a prostitute than it is to say she's one of Jesus' beloved.
And all of that seems to reflect what is going on in the church at that time. This is the debate about the role of men and the role of women in the church. Is there room for a figure like Mary? Is there room for an independent female voice in the church? And the Gospel of Mary says, yes, there is. Many of the New Testament texts say, no, there is not.
By the second half of the 4th century, Gnostic texts were censored by the Church. Bishop Athanasius sent a letter to be read in every house of worship, every monastery. It was a communication that listed not only the books that were to become the official New Testament, but also those that were to be left out.
And so the Gospel of Mary, like some other Gospels, the Gospel of Peter, were probably Gospels that were only on the fringe. Furthermore, the Gospel of Mary is through and through a Gnostic gospel and would not have appealed to what I think would be the majority church that determined the shape of the New Testament.
And it seems as if it is very likely that some of the monks near Nag Hammadi heard the pious and powerful and authoritative words of Bishop Athanasius, and they heard him say that there were some books they should not read. And they went to their library, we think, and they cleaned out their library and felt they had to dispose of these books, but they loved these books. They couldn't throw them in the Nile. They couldn't burn them. And so they stuffed them into a big jar, put a top on the jar, and buried the jar safely by a big rock at the foot of a cliff near Nag Hammadi.
And so it was that ancient Gnostic writings would remain hidden, waiting perhaps for another generation and another time to emerge into the light of day. It is a writing that describes Jesus' trial and execution and his descent into hell. It is called the Gospel of Nicodemus.
Prepared to receive Jesus of Nazareth himself, who boasted that he was the Son of God, and yet was a man afraid of death, and said, "My soul is sorrowful, even to death."
It's one of those texts that people have known and have been reading for really quite a long time. It ran into some difficulty with the Protestant reformers, in fact, because it was so popular, that they went out of their way to try to squelch the Gospel of Nicodemus, if you will, and to take it out of circulation.
The first part of the book purports to be an eyewitness account of the Savior's trial and execution. It includes criminal charges made by the high priests of the temple that Jesus is not only a dangerous sorcerer, but also Mary's illegitimate child.
The first part of the book, we can imagine, was written in the 3rd or 4th century because we have testimony to it from church fathers from the 4th century. And it speaks of a people who are concerned about their faith because they're being